Well, I think undeniably in the last week, in the last year, it has been the most important issue in our country, and that is this feeling like we have a growing divide. Feeling, reality, that's what we all have to figure out for ourselves. And if you're listening to the show, a couple days ago, I played clips from a guy who made a video. He is joining me as a private citizen here. His name is Andrew, and he joins us here on the Dori Monson Show. Andrew, I really appreciate you coming on with me.
Thank you for inviting me, Dori.
Absolutely. So you made a video, and you talked about the challenges, the fears, because there's been so much talk about whether what happened in Atlanta was an anti-Asian hate crime. You are, I believe, a Korean American. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay. So tell me where you are as far as anxiety and experience and what you're dealing with right now.
Yeah, there have been a lot of incidents this past year with anti-Asian violence. I read a story recently where just in King County area, that violence has risen 33% in the past year from 2019 to 2020. And I think the answer to the question in terms of how has it affected me, has it affected my family, the answer is absolutely yes. We definitely live with a very real sense of fear and lack of safety for people in the Asian community. And I think the saddest part is that it's particularly women and elderly who have been victimized in this case. They're kind of the most vulnerable. And so as a husband and, a father of 4 daughters, I can tell you that, when I have to tell my wife or daughter to not go running or biking in certain places, that's a sad situation. I just spoke to another Asian colleague of mine whose child is reconsidering where to go to college because of the increase in anti-Asian violence this year. And I think this is representative of these are the kind of choices that people of color are making right now.
Okay.
Out of fear, and it shouldn't be that way for anyone in our community.
Here are the questions I raised, and I'd like to give you a chance to respond to all of them. I get a lot of threats because of the nature of my job. I knew I was going to talk to you today. So in the last 24 hours, I've gotten 6 physical threats via either text or email. I've built up a pretty thick skin because it says a lot about the cowardice on the other side and nothing about me. But nobody wants to live in fear. And my concern, Andrew, is that the threat, while you tell me it's very real, I fear that we have politicians and media that exaggerate the fear and that instill more fear than the reality of what the threat is. And you mentioned your wife afraid to walk your kids at Golden Gardens. I grew up right by Golden Gardens. I know a woman who was brutally attacked, a white woman who was brutally attacked in attempted rape in the bathhouse at Golden Gardens a couple of years ago. She's become a good friend. There was a woman brutally raped at a car dealership not far away from there, a white woman. Crime is happening to everybody. And yet I'm hearing from Asians and black people that you're afraid to go out sometime, and that's where I wonder if this is an exaggerated fear because of how much emphasis is put on it by politicians and media.
Yeah, that's a really tricky question to answer. What I can tell you is that fear affects fear affects everyone differently, right? Even within my own family, I tend to be the one that is less afraid of things or less motivated by a sense of fear than my wife, for example, or some of my daughters. No matter the case, people who are operating under a sense of fear, even if it's a low level of fear, that can be really, really, it's not a healthy situation for people. People aren't performing their best or acting in their best way when they're motivated or they have an underlying sense of fear inside them. And especially when it's the fear of, something that's related to just the color of my skin or the color of my hair, right? Something that I can't change. And that carries just a huge weight. And it can be super paralyzing for some folks in our community. So I understand where you're coming from in the sense that, yes, we have fear all around us and reasons to be fearful. But I do think that especially racial racially motivated fear tends to hit us a little bit harder.
What I notice is people tell me all the time, perception is reality. So if I perceive that is my reality. Yeah, but it's my job to also push out what is reality. So here's what I talked about in my show yesterday. Last year, 2020, there were 3,800 crimes in America. Not crimes. There were 3,800 bias incidents against Asian Americans in the United States. And that includes microaggressions, which can be defined as, you speak English very well. And that surprised me. That's some of the microaggressions that were defined. There are 18.6 million Asian Americans. So even if you include those microaggressions, Andrew, you have a 1 in 4,905 chance of being the victim of a bias incident, the vast majority of which are, either verbal or shunning or something like that. And so why can't we get our heads around the reality of those numbers and not let that fear paralyze us?
Again, I think it's related to the fear, like you said, is very real for people. And when it's outside of our control, it's a very scary position to be in for someone to worry. And in some cases, because obviously the things that get put out in the media are unfortunately some of the more brutal situations, like the attack that occurred in Chinatown, and those things again for people become extremely visual fears for them that draw them to be paralyzed. And so I here are the numbers. I will counter that slightly by saying, I think one thing we know about numbers is that things get underreported significantly. And I will say that, being in the Asian community myself, I would be the first to say that, Asians are definitely underreporting these incidences, partially because our culture, I think, is one where, it's almost shameful to admit that I was, a victim of a potential hate crime or harassment or stalking.
And, I also talked about, I have black friends who are petrified when their kids go out at night. They're afraid they're going to get shot by a cop. And the numbers certainly don't back that up. There was a poll of liberals that asked how many black people, unarmed black people, are shot by cops every year. 53% of the respondents said over 1,000, which is by orders of magnitude just ridiculous. The number was 22 in 2019, last year. Unarmed blacks, 29 unarmed whites. I guess I'll ask, when I try to counter, and I understand this is your reality, when I try to counter your reality with the numbers that I give, do you resent that at all on my part?
I'm an engineer, right? So I love definitely talking about facts.
You like facts and data. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Love facts and data. That being said, I think the experience of a lot of people, and I'm in no way representing, like a lot of people of color. I guess I'm just going to speak for myself.
Sure.
I think the reality that there are experiences and fears that some of us, because of the color of our skin, need to experience and others don't. That points to this sense of inequity, right? Like why as an Asian are Asians experiencing more hate crime in the past year and an increase in that, whereas that same data doesn't hold true for, say, another ethnicity. You might say similarly, in other circumstances where other ethnic groups have been targeted after things happen in the news or media. And so I think that reality for folks is again, a really, really difficult thing because they're looking at their own people based on nothing that I've done, right, or nothing that our people have done, but on something that is, again, another perception that's causing there to be more hatred, right, towards Asian. And even if that's a 33% increase from a very small number to a marginally larger number, it still represents for Asians, again, kind of a diminishing of our sense of security and our safety. So
another data point I'll give, through March 18th, King County prosecutors, they've charged 2 hate crimes against Asians. With Asian victims. In both cases, the suspects are black. And they're certainly in chargeable hate crimes. it's trending down significantly from last year. And so I just keep looking at these numbers. And here's the other thing, Andrew. Undeniably, Asians have been the subject of prejudice and bias from, the earliest Chinese laborers who came to America. I don't think anybody's going to deny that. But we also look at things like median family income and college placement and the admiration that so many people have for the dedication to intact families, the dedication to education that has served Asian Americans so well. And I think people have, and this is why there might be a disconnect, people have so long just looked at with great admiration at how Asians, despite the prejudice that so many have experienced, have thrived and prospered. And then, we hear about the increase in the crimes, and there's a disconnect between those two things. What you're telling me is your reality, and that is fear and people who are discriminating against you. I think it's really hard because this has only cropped up really in the consciousness of America in the last year and specifically in the last week or so. And it's very different from the perception of Asian Americans that I think most people had prior to a year ago.
And I would say, obviously, the circumstances of our past year have been hugely contributing to that. There's been a lot of anti-Asian sentiment coming out of COVID, obviously, and the economic impacts of that. Obviously, the sicknesses and the deaths in the United States. And then there's been obviously a lot of media attention on folks that have attributed that to China. And so that is all kind of played out, I think, in a way that unfortunately has led to anti-Asian sentiment. And so I see that disconnect that you're talking about, and yet it has very much felt like the facts or the events of this past year have definitely steered it in that direction of increasing anti-Asian sentiment.
In your video, you said there are rich white neighborhoods you're afraid to go into. Why and where? What neighborhoods are we talking about?
Yeah, I was, so the context is important on that. I was referring to and describing, my wife, like you mentioned, being nervous about going to Golden Gardens Park. And then I extended that to, the fact that she's afraid to walk in that park because of the anti-Asian sort of harassment that was occurring in that neighborhood back in like May of last year. I was comparing that and saying, and this is just kind of a, symbolic of what a lot of people of color experience, and not just Asians in this sense, so Blacks, so indigenous populations, beyond that. So I was drawing that comparison and saying, and many of those communities have felt that fear, like that, they may not be able to go running, for example, in a particular neighborhood. And so in that case, I wasn't specifically talking about my experience or my wife's experience, but more drawing the analogy to the experiences of other people.
Right. But again, the two most brutal crimes near that area, the victims were white women. The most brutal crimes in the last couple of years down there. So again, I just don't want people's perception to be wildly different from reality, and it's so, everything's so divisive, and I know that, and I get it, and I wish there were some things like the data you and I were talking about that we can agree on, but we can't even agree on that because of how the prism through which we view the world, and I understand that, and I get that, and I don't know how or if that's going to change.
Yeah, I mean, I would, not debating the fact that the frequency is still very low. I would definitely suggest that the data is underreported. But even with underreporting of data, I still think we're seeing an increase in it. Again, I think there are multiple studies. I think you're referencing the Stop AAPI Hate that, said that there was 3,800 instances. And again, I mentioned King County, about a 33% increase. Mm-hmm. In anti-Asian things. So those are very real things. And again, even if the frequency on the whole maybe still small, that increase is not something that I think should go unnoticed.
Andrew, what a great conversation. I loved having you on. I really appreciate you doing this with me.
Thank you so much, Dori.
All right. Andrew, private citizen. Let me know what you think. 98973. That's 98973. Lots more to come here in the Dori Monson Show.